and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. Hey guys, so today I wanted to start talking about the infrastructure phase of launching a hybrid school. Okay, now in the previous episodes, most of what I was talking about was in the preparation stage, planning out your program, figuring out where your role is and where you're going to thrive, figuring out what your mission statement is, making sure that your market is there, and making sure that you have a facility. Now, we're going to talk about the infrastructure. Now, budget is actually very important, and I think that you should do that around now as part of your planning phase. But first, let's just talk about the infrastructure that you're going to need, because that is going to feed into your budget as you figure out what your expenses are, okay? So all the prep stuff shouldn't have cost you anything, right? Because you're just figuring out what you're going to build, making sure your vision is sound, and making sure that your community wants it and is able to pay for it, and also building some awareness around it, okay? And making sure you don't get distracted with people's opinions and all of that kind of thing, all right? So now you're getting down into the actual, it's not really the preparation anymore as far as the whole program, but it's getting into the nitty-gritty preparation. What kind of infrastructure do you need? Okay. Now, the first part of infrastructure is your facility, and it's going to probably take the longest time, which is why I talked about that in the previous episode. It takes a while, a couple of months, right? But while you're working on contacting buildings and looking at buildings and all of that and talking about the budget for the buildings, you also want to get a handle on all of these other pieces. Okay, so what are these other pieces? Well, assuming that we're talking about a program of around 4 to 6 classes or possibly larger, you're going to need some systems in place for admissions, for staffing and employment, and for the organizational, just the business part of it, and for student information and all of that. Okay, so let's take those pieces, okay? Now, your business part, the organization part, you don't really have to do much with once you've put your paperwork in, okay? So once you've decided that you're going to do this, you have a market for it, you're sending in your paperwork to the state, you're incorporating as either a LLC or a nonprofit, you've got a little fee for that, but then you pretty much don't have to do anything with that again, except for your yearly taxes, okay? And possibly you have to register every year with your state, depending on your state, which usually has a bit of a fee. So you need to make sure you have a business address that's registered with your state, so you get business mail and IRS mail in a place where it's not going to get lost, okay? And that's just a kind of logistical piece of infrastructure you have to make sure. We moved buildings a lot the first few years, and the business address was just at my house, which made sure that important mail wasn't getting misplaced in a church mailbox or something. It was just coming to my house, so I would see it for sure, okay? You can also use a registered agent for that. All right, so that organizational part isn't too complex, okay? Now, you've got taxes that need to happen every year, so you need to have bookkeeping done every year, okay? And this is true whether it's an LLC or a nonprofit, okay? Now, nonprofit accounting is a little more complex, so you do want to make sure that you either have a good handle on nonprofit accounting if you're going to do the bookkeeping yourself. And by bookkeeping, what I'm talking about there is you have your bank account set up. Don't forget to make sure you have a bank account set up under the business name. Don't use your personal account, even if it's an LLC, okay? have a business account, an EIN. It's not too complex to do that at all. And make sure all of your expenses and all of your money is coming in and out of your business account. Now, every time money goes in or out, you need to label it as something. You need to categorize it so that you know what it is, okay? And this is helpful for budgeting and reports, especially with a nonprofit, okay? But it's helpful in any case because you can write off expenses with an LLC and all of that kind of thing. So you just need to label things, okay? Now, you can get away with some pretty basic knowledge and label things yourself as long as you're doing it, okay? I do suggest getting a handle on the terminology, and even if you are doing nonprofit accounting, there is a course you can take. It's a 5-hour video course. This may be too much for you, and please go find an accountant, bookkeeper at an accountant's office if you need to do that. And I would highly recommend doing that, especially if you're a nonprofit. But there is a 5-hour course you can take called QuickBooks for Nonprofits, and this is specifically for QuickBooks. You can get it through TechSoup. If you're a nonprofit registered with TechSoup, which has a lot of reduced priced things for nonprofits specifically, you can take that course and you can learn just the basics of bookkeeping. Even if you do hire it out, it's really helpful to know something about it as a director and a founder. Nonprofit bookkeeping is really important to make sure that the yearly 990 is done correctly. That goes on the records for anyone can go see that. And if you, especially if you're going to be looking for grants and donations and fundraising, you need to keep your books well so that everything's on the up and up. If you ever decide to pay for an audit, if you get larger, so this is a whole thing. I don't want to get into a whole bunch of this, but if you decide to get larger and you're going to need a few years of well-kept nonprofit books to get an audit. And this is an audit for nonprofits specifically that says, yes, they're a good organization to donate to. So if you think at any point, and that's kind of expensive to do, by the way, so you may not be there for 10 years or something, or never, which is fine. But you want to keep your books straight from the beginning. So that's why I'm telling you this now, okay? Even if you're an LLC, you need to keep your books. Okay, did I beat a dead horse there? All right. You need to know how to categorize things as they go in and out. And it's not too complex as far as like whether you're buying supplies or curriculum or you're paying salaries or you're paying a tax or you're paying insurances. You just need to make sure you label those things, okay? Now, as long as you're labeling them in a way that you can explain it to the accountant, that's certainly better than not labeling it at all. But it's better to sit down with an accounting office if you're going to do it yourself and just say, here's the stuff I need to spend money on. Here's the categories. What do I need to keep track of? Can you suggest some categories, right? If you pay them and you just sit down with them and you explain who you are, what you're doing, and what your software is and all of that, you can just do it yourself for the most part. Okay, I do not suggest doing the actual taxes yourself, but you could do the bookkeeping yourself, or you can also just hire somebody. All right. That's that. Make sure that you have that from day one. All right, I won't say it again. Now, the other infrastructure that you're going to need is you're going to need like compliance stuff as far as like you got to have your insurances. Okay. So you're probably going to need either a professional insurance if you're an LLC or a directors and officers insurance if you are a nonprofit for your board. You're going to need liability insurance on your kids. You're probably going to need workers' comp insurance on your employees. And you're going to probably want to have some sort of property or renter's insurance in case there's, fire or water damage or whatever to stuff that you own. Okay. So you want to make sure that you have those, especially the liability and the workers' comp for compliance. Okay. So that's infrastructure that you're going to have to like find an agent and you have to call them up and you're going to tell them what your program is and, get quotes on that as you're building out your budget. I tell you in my strategic planning course, I have some numbers for all of this stuff that are realistic that I have operated with that you can like budget with. But of course you should call, find places and get real quotes for your business yourself. Okay. Okay. So you got your bookkeeper, your bookkeeping, including your bookkeeping software, which you can use something that's free or do it within your bank account. Or you can use something like QuickBooks that you can pay for. There's other ones also. You're probably going to have to pay for those. but you want to have them in place, the system itself in place on top of actually doing it. Okay. You can have your insurances. Now, you're also going to need a payroll system for any employees that you have. Okay. Just pay for the payroll system unless you have a bookkeeper who can withdraw and hold taxes and all of that stuff. But if you just use a payroll system, it's not too expensive, but just put it in your budget that it's going to cost this. And that will, you can onboard all your employees into that. You can have all the forms for hiring in that payroll system. And they will actually, the bank accounts will go into that for direct deposit and all of that, the employees will onboard into the system. Usually nowadays it's, you can send them like an invitation and they can put all their information in themselves. And then you're going to have to run the payroll, but it's not too complex to do it. Actually run the payroll as far as like putting in the hours that they worked or just running the salary or whatever, or any time off. You might have to make some changes on that. But if they're just getting like a regular paycheck, you basically can just, push a couple buttons and run the payroll. And then the biggest thing is the system will also send out the employee and the employer taxes. So the employer, your organization, is going to owe taxes and they will send that out for you. They'll withdraw from your account and send it. And the employee who's responsible for their own withholdings, that will also get sent, but they have to fill out their information correctly when they onboard. Okay. So you need to pay for the payroll system and you need to have it set up. All right. So that's another piece of research you're going to have to do. And I used OnPay for years. I like them. There's a lot of good ones out there. Okay. So there's your employees and your hiring infrastructure. Okay. Now, for your actual students and families, you also need infrastructure for that. All right. Now, you can start pretty small with this, especially if you only have, a couple dozen families. I found this was sustainable up to like 50-ish kids, which was maybe 25 to 30 families, to just kind of do things manually. The first year when we only had 20 kids, people would like hand me a check and I'd stick it in my, in my pocket and bring it to the bank. But I wasn't even invoicing people or anything. I don't recommend that, but sometimes that's what you do in the beginning. You have a little box by the door and have them drop it in. Make sure you have a due date and all that stuff. We'll talk about that in another episode. You can just have like maybe Google Forms or paper forms. Paper forms are wonderful because yes, you have to store them and they can get lost and wet and spill your coffee on them, but you also don't have to deal with any technical issues. You stick them in a folder. You can have all your paper forms and you can literally just, send out an email reminder or have, write it on the whiteboard. Tuition's due today. Have a little box underneath that. You can do stuff the old fashioned way. You don't have to pay for any infrastructure. Okay. You can do that for you can do that for years if you're not huge. Okay. You could do it huge too. Everyone always did before the computers. But there comes a size where it gets a little unmanageable and it's easier to have some sort of, system in place. So you can use like Google Forms, which is free, especially if you have G Suite for education, which is a whole other thing, but you couldn't get a Google Workspace thing. And then you can use the emails and all of that. But that will organize like family and student information into spreadsheets, which, then you have to like either print them out or whatever, but you can use Google Forms and spreadsheets. You can also invoice often from your bank. Your bookkeeper could send people invoices and make sure that people can pay that way by getting an invoice. I used Wave Apps for several years where I would manually invoice people. And once I set it up, I would set it up right after registration in the summer. And, some people, whether they marked they wanted to pay up front or they wanted to pay twice a year, they wanted to pay monthly, I'd set that up and it would take a while when I did it the first time. But then everything was pretty automatic and they would just get an email invoice. And then there was, a small fee that Wave Apps took. But it would email the invoice and then they would pay and then it would go into our bank account. Okay. But you need something like that. Now, Wave Apps is like QuickBooks in the sense that it's a very very simple bookkeeping software and you can invoice through it for a fee. It used to be a small fee. I don't know what it is now, but it used to only be like 1%. So that's an infrastructure for invoicing and bookkeeping that you need. Okay. Now, You can do that invoicing through your bookkeeping software usually, but then you also have your student information. So there's kind of like two different pieces there. I don't suggest using a tuition system until you get to at least like 80-ish kids or more like 100 kids. And then you're going to be paying hundreds of dollars a year for that system, and they have fees and all of that. But once if you get to more than 100 kids, it can be very useful to use one of those because they're set up for schools. And then like all the student information and the enrollment and the registration and the tuition and all of that goes through the tuition management system. And this is something like FACTS or TADS are some common ones. But they were kind of built for like small private schools and Catholic schools. They've been around for a while. They're not cutting edge, but those are the ones that are around right now. They've been around for a while. I think there's probably some new ones. There should be new ones coming up, I think. Omella is another one to check out, but it's not really built for tuition management. Anyway, the tuition management ones are specifically built for enrollment and registration. And there's, you can also organize the student and family information. So like, asking about allergies and contacts and which parent emergency contacts, any information that you need about the student, and it kind of goes into the system and you can like print out reports and all of that. That stuff is very useful, but you need some sort of infrastructure to organize that. It can be remarkably easy in a bad way to lose things or to like lose them in translation, like you gather them, but then they never make it to the people that need to see them. And it's kind of like funny how it can happen, how you can maybe you can get it, and then it doesn't ever make it like to the teacher, right? And that's, there's no point in having it. And it can be, in worst case scenario, it can be like dangerous, like imagine a parent puts in that their child has a allergy or something and the teacher never gets the information, that would be awful, right? So you want to make sure that you have a smooth infrastructure. So along those lines, a lot of times, unless you can find a system that also does this, and I honestly had a really hard time finding a system that did this, even the tuition management system, they gathered student information and collected tuition for me and all of that stuff, which was super helpful. It still didn't have like signups and that kind of thing for like extra things. It was like really clunky and really difficult to get it in and took forever. So we ended up needing to find infrastructure that would serve that purpose. And that's where we ended up using like Omella or like Google Forms with Square. But this stuff all takes like, Omella wasn't too bad, but it can take a long time to like find it and get it to work, especially if there's payments involved, okay? And where like maybe parents are signing up for a field trip and they have to sign up, you need to make sure that you know how many people are there and how many siblings are bringing and blah, 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 right? So you have to have a good sign up system for that. Okay, so to review that, we have our facility, we have our organizational paperwork, we have our insurances, we have our payroll system, we have our bookkeeping system, and we have our student information and tuition system. Okay, that is all infrastructure, right? And you also have some little like smaller side systems like signups and payments for any kind of extra things. And you want to make sure that you have at least those major ones in place and you know how much they're going to cost before you do your budget. Okay. Now, again, you have a little bit of time to figure this stuff out, but if you're going to feel like you have a lot better handle on things as you're like searching for your building. If you go through each of those areas, you make some phone calls, you do some Googling, you get some quotes on things and you say, okay, it's going to cost me this for this, and you write all those numbers down and you know what's going to go into your budget and what like the realistic costs are. And most of the time, you're going to be glad you have a system in place to help ease those things. You want to keep it to as few systems as you can. So if you can find just a couple systems that do as much of that as possible, right? Then that's good because you don't want a bunch of moving pieces if you can avoid it. But as much as possible, you want few systems, but you want them to do the job well, and you're going to have to pay for it. But it's going to save you a ton of time to have that infrastructure in place. Okay. Now, just a short word on, there's also physical infrastructure as far as like your furnishings and your supplies and curriculum and all of that stuff. So another thing that's often happening in this phase is you're nailing down like the actual materials you're going to be using, right? at this point, you should have a rough like schedule of like at least know which classes you're offering. And you also want to know, hopefully you have your philosophy and your mission, so you know roughly what sorts of education you're offering. But when you're nailing down like actually like purchasing books, teachers' manuals, how much are you going to have your parents purchase? How much are you going to purchase? Where are you going to store it all? Tables and chairs and bookshelves, right? If you know you're going to have to furnish some classrooms, this is the time to start figuring out if you're going to be buying that stuff new, how much it's going to cost if you do that. Can you get donations? Can you thrift stuff? We thrifted a lot of stuff our first year and picked stuff up. We sent our husbands to pick things up on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, and tables and chairs, put things in the back of people's trucks and that kind of thing. That happened for a few years. And it's time consuming to do all of that. So again, you want to look at what a realistic budget is, how much you have available to you, but you do want to have things set up physically in the physical space. You want to think about all of that now, just so it's not, oh, we didn't think about this at all, and now we're in the space and we have to go purchase stuff and we don't have it in our budget or whatever. Okay. The main things are probably more those like technological infrastructure, but make sure you're thinking about your physical infrastructure as well. So hopefully that was helpful with thinking about your infrastructure. Again, keep a couple months probably. You could do this while you're looking for your facility, getting all of this sorted out, assuming you've already done all of your prep work. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.